Ancient Egypt. For millennium, it has captured the imaginations, hearts, and minds of generations of truth seekers, eager to know who really built the pyramids, when they were built, and why they were built.
This documentary series is comprehensive. It's the biggest documentary series ever made about ancient Egypt. This documentary series will not only rewrite the history of ancient Egypt, it will turn the history of the human race upside down. So come with me as we go down the Nile and we discover the truth beneath the sands of Egypt. Ever since I was a child, I had a fascination with ancient Egypt. Any book, any documentary, I watched it, I read everything. But every time I saw it or I read it, something about what the Egyptologists were telling me didn't ring true. And for years and years and years, like a big jigsaw puzzle, I tried to put the pieces together. And I tried to put them together the way the Egyptologists had them. But the picture didn't make sense. And then I came to Egypt and I saw the evidence for myself. And the picture started to take a different shape. So come with me as we go down the Nile and we discover the truth beneath the sands of Egypt.
The name Old Kingdom was coined by archaeologists in the 19th century in an attempt to separate and differentiate Egypt's long history, although the Egyptians themselves never referred to this period by that name.
Nor would they have seen any difference between the period that preceded it and the one that succeeded it.
Egyptologists traditionally include the Third Dynasty in the period of the Old Kingdom, firstly because the pyramid of King Djoser at Saqqara, the first pyramid ever built in Egypt, seemed to link that dynasty to the building efforts of the Fourth Dynasty. Secondly, because the last king of the Third Dynasty was related to the first king of the Fourth. And thirdly, because Djoser and his successors ruled from Memphis, which remained the capital during the Old Kingdom.
Well, firstly, there's actually no proof that Djoser, or to give him his correct Horus name, Netjereket, which means divine of body, actually did build the step pyramid, or that it was the first built in Egypt. Remember the image of the pyramid in a compound on the Nama palette? Well, we will get right into that later in the series when we get to Saqqara. But before we do, there's a major obstacle that needs to be addressed. I think we all need to stop calling Djoser Djoser and start referring to him by his proper name, Netjereket. Because the name Djoser was only found scrawled on a wall in Saqqara, never in any authoritative place or fashion. Yes, it might be a nickname or a family name, but it could just as easily be the name of the local graffiti artist of the Third Dynasty.
To add to the confusion, just like with the two preceding dynasties, there is also no clarity over who actually ruled during the Third Dynasty. Both the Turin king list and the Abydos king list record 5 kings for the Third Dynasty, while the Saqqara tablet only records 4, and there is little agreement on those.
And that tells me that the Old Kingdom was not as unified as we've been led to believe. At least not the Third Dynasty. That there was still some division between Upper and Lower Egypt.
The Turin king list gives Nebkar, Netjereket, Djoser Hudjerfer I and Huni. The Abydos king list gives Nebkar, Netjereket, Teti, Sedjes, and Neferkare. The Saqqara tablet gives Netjereket, Djoser Teti, Nebkare, and Huni. while Manetho names Nefer-upes as the first pharaoh of the Third Dynasty. And, depending who you cite, the pharaohs of the Third Dynasty ruled for a total of between 64 and 75 years, beginning from anywhere between 2686 BC and 2584 BC. Thus, due to the fragmentary nature of the records from the period, the exact identity of the founder of the dynasty is a matter of some debate. Netjerekit, also known by his Hellenized names, Tosorthros, from Manetho, and Sisorthos, from Eusebius, was the son of King Karsekemwe and Queen Nim-Mathap, but whether he was also the direct throne successor is still unclear. Most Ramesside king lists name a King Nebkar before him, but since there are still difficulties in connecting that name with contemporary Horus names, some Egyptologists question the throne sequence. There is the possibility that Nebkar and Sanacht were the same person, and speculation that Nebkar should be placed between Netjerekit and Huni, and not before Netjerekit. There is also some speculation that Nebkar was Netjerekit's elder brother and therefore the first king of the Third Dynasty.
Of course, any and all of that is possible, but is there any evidence? And if there is, what does it tell us?
The weight of archaeological evidence, including seals found at the entrance to Karsekemwe's tomb at Abydos and at Beit Caliph, points to Netjerekit as one of the principal candidates as the founder of the Third Dynasty, as the seals demonstrate that it was Netjerekit rather than Nebkar or Sanacht who buried and succeeded King Karsekemwe. This is because of Netjerekit's link to Karsekemwe through Karsekemwe's northern wife, Queen Nim-Mathap, the seal at Abydos naming Nim-Mathap as the mother of the king's children, Nim-Mathap.
That's children, plural.
On Mastabur K1 at Beit Caliph, the same person is mentioned as the mother of the Jewel King.
What if the seal actually says, mother of the Jewel Kings, plural? Then it would support the position that there were two brothers who shared the kingdom of Egypt, Nebkar in Upper Egypt and Netjerekit in Lower Egypt. In the alternative, Netjerekit ruled in both Upper and Lower Egypt.
The dating of other seals at the Beit Caliph site placed them to the reign of Netjerekit as well. This evidence suggests that Karsekemwe is either the direct father of Netjerekit or that Nim-Mathap had him through a previous husband.
Which would mean she already had a child, a royal child, when Netjerekit took her as a wife. So was this why Netjerekit rose to the throne? Not because he was the son of Karsekemwe, but because he was the son of Nim-Mathap, because she was a northern queen and most likely a direct lineage of the Thinite kings. Is this why the women were so important? Because of their lineage? We will get to that in much greater detail later in the series when we look at the 18th dynasty. But if Nebkar were the elder brother, possibly Netjerekit's half-brother, then he may initially have been left in charge of Upper Egypt and Netjerekit of Lower Egypt. But perhaps Nebkar died soon after, and Netjerekit assumed the throne of Upper Egypt, uniting them in the process. The truth is, we can speculate until the cows come home. We just don't know.
Not much is known of Netjerekit and his life. There is a painted limestone statue of him now in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, it being the oldest known life-sized Egyptian statue. Apart from his mother, Nim-Mathap, several other women are identified with him, Hetepernepti, one of Netjerekit's queens, whose name is found on a series of boundary stelae from the Step Pyramid enclosure and a fragment of relief from a building at Hermopolis, and in it Karwes, their only daughter known by name. During his reign, Netjerekit dispatched several military expeditions to the Sinai Peninsula, strategically important as a buffer between the Nile Valley and Ashur, subduing the local inhabitants and mining for valuable minerals such as turquoise and copper, sometimes displaying the banner of Seth. alongside the symbols of Horus, as had been more common under Kar-Sekhemwy,
which would appear to be consistent with his northern Thinite origins.
It was also during the Third Dynasty, beginning with the reign of Netjerikit, that the independent regions of the country came to be known as nomes, states or districts directly under the rule of a centralized government at Memphis.
So part of the country, but not all of the country. Perhaps this is where the other listed rulers, Neferkare and Hujefa I, come in. They were short-term rulers of a state, or a nome, most likely of Lower Egypt, as opposed to ruling Egypt itself.
These changes also encompassed developments in architecture, with some fragmentary reliefs found at Heliopolis and Jebel mentioning Netjerikit's name and suggesting he commissioned construction projects in those cities. He may also have fixed the southern boundary of his kingdom at the First Cataract, an inscription known as the Famine Stellar and claiming to date to the reign of Netjerikit, but probably created during the Ptolemaic dynasty, relating how Netjerikit rebuilt the Temple of Khnum on the island of Elephantine at the First Cataract, thus ending a 7-year famine in Egypt. Some consider this ancient inscription as a legend at the time it was inscribed. Nonetheless, it does show that more than 2 millennia after his reign, Egyptians still remembered Netjerikit. In fact, whoever wrote the Turin King list wrote Netjerikit's name in red ink, an indication the ancient Egyptians recognized the historical importance of Netjerikit in their culture. In any case, Netjerikit is probably best known as the king who commissioned his vizier, Imhotep, to build the earliest surviving pyramid, the Step Pyramid.
Well, there are lots of assumptions there. First, that Netjerikit actually commissioned Imhotep at all. Second, whether it was in fact to build a pyramid, or perhaps repair or refurbish an existing one. And thirdly, whether it was in fact the first pyramid. We know from the Nama palette that at least one pyramid surrounded by a compound existed before the First Dynasty. Perhaps it was the one at Saqqara, and Imhotep's task was to upgrade it somehow. We're going to have a much more in-depth examination of Imhotep later in the series, but for now let's just see what his role was within the Third Dynasty.
Imhotep, seal-bearer of the king of Lower Egypt, first after the king of Upper Egypt, administrator of the Grand Palace, hereditary noble, high priest of Heliopolis, Imhotep, head of the royal shipyard, and overseer of all stone works, builder and sculptor. Imhotep, who oversaw and revolutionized stone building projects such as the royal tombs of Netjerikit and his successor, Sekhemkhet. Prior to Imhotep's innovation, the early tombs of Egypt were mostly mastabas built of mud brick.
Except for the tomb of the First Dynasty king, Den, that had a floor of red and black granite.
But Imhotep wanted a lasting memorial to his king and so created a complex with a stone pyramid as its center and surrounding temples, thus inventing the paradigm which would be followed by every dynasty which followed to greater or lesser degrees.
Well, that's the spiel, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's true. And if the Nama palette is anything to go by, it's not.
The pyramid at Saqqara is actually a stack of mastabas rather than a true pyramid, and even though Netjerikit's pyramid of stone was a wholly new creation, it still utilized early dynastic period techniques.
We're going to have a look at what the Egyptologists tell us about the Step Pyramid in a minute, and fully dissect the Step Pyramid in great detail when we get to Saqqara later in the series. But for now, let's focus on the evidence and overview of the dynasty.
During Netjerikit's time, Imhotep was of such importance and fame that he was honored by being mentioned on statues of King Netjerikit in his necropolis at Saqqara. And a papyrus from the ancient Egyptian temple of Teb Tunis, dating to the 2nd century AD, preserves a long story, in Demotic script, about Netjerikit and Imhotep. deified sometime during or after the New Kingdom by the people of Memphis, who ascribed medical skills to him. In the 3rd century BC, the Egyptian historian Manetho repeated the traditional belief that Imhotep had invented the art of building in stone during Djoser's reign. Imhotep was later seen by the Greeks as the healing god Asclepius. Imhotep's most famous monument was his step pyramid, which entailed the construction of several mastaba tombs one over another. These forms would eventually lead to the standard pyramid tomb in the later Old Kingdom.
Again, there's no actual evidence for any of this. It's all just speculation by archaic Egyptologists, and the perpetuation of that speculation as fact by modern Egyptologists. But what do they say about the step pyramid?
Situated northwest of the city of Memphis, the step pyramid of Djoser, as it is known, dominates the landscape of the Saqqara necropolis. Its architect, Imhotep, supposedly drew ideas from several precedents, the most relevant being Mastaba 3038, found at Saqqara, its substructure laying in a 4-meter-deep rectangular pit, with mud brick walls rising to 6 meters, and 3 sides extended and built out to create 8 shallow steps rising at an angle of 49 degrees. This would have been an elongated step pyramid if the remaining side had not been left uncovered.
Note the mud brick walls. Surely it's also possible that Mastaba 3038 was modelled on the step pyramid.
Imhotep's departure from those previous architectural precedents resulted in a stepped pyramid 62.5 meters tall, with a base of 109 meters by 121 meters, and clad in polished white limestone.
Yes, clad in limestone. But was the rest of the superstructure, the steps, made of mud brick? It would appear so.
The pyramid went through several revisions and redevelopments of the original plan before resulting in the final innovative 7-level, 4-sided structure, the earliest large-scale cut stone building in Egypt. It gives us a glimpse of the transition from the royal mastaba tombs of Saqqara, large mud brick rectangular cores with broad faces oriented north-south and ornamented with recessed paneling, to the true pyramid made of cut stone.
But were all of these revisions done by Imhotep during the reign of Netjerikhet? Unlikely. But who knows? If they were, then perhaps Imhotep was not really the great architect as he's being made out to be.
The superstructure of the step pyramid is 6 steps and, as might be expected with an experimental structure, was built in 6 stages.
But was it planned that way?
Archaeologists use codes to describe the different states of the pyramid over time, there being 3 mastabas, then 3 pyramids. The 3 mastabas are called M1, M2, and M3, and the 3 pyramids, P1, P2, and P3. The pyramid began as a square mastaba, M1, with a core made of rubble cemented with clay mortar, surrounded by a retaining wall of carefully hewn 30-centimeter limestone blocks, enclosed by a second wall, 3 meters thick, to create a mastaba with the relatively modest dimensions of 63 meters by 63 meters by 8 meters. Most Egyptologists believe the initial mastaba was the original tomb of Djoser. However, the fact that the mastaba was square has led many to believe that it was never meant to be a mastaba, as no other known mastabas had ever been square.
So he built a square mastaba. Or maybe this was actually the first mastaba ever built. And later mastabas were expanded to be rectangular. In any case, we don't know for a fact that it was Netjerikhet's tomb. It's all speculation.
The first modification was to extend the mastaba by adding further limestone blocks on the 4 sides, slightly lower than the original building, to form M2, measuring 71.5 meters by 71.5 meters by 8 meters.
But no explanation is given as to why it was extended. If this was Netjerikhet's tomb, it was all about what was under the ground. Why was the top modified? Was it modified because it was damaged and repaired?
The next step marked a change in the structure of the building when it was enlarged on the east side, making it 79.5 meters by 71.5 meters by 8 meters, its rectangular base now on an east-west axis. The extension included 11 regularly uniform well shafts of variable depth, the deepest being 33 meters, dug along the east face of the addition and incorporated into the pre-existing substructure as it expanded eastward. Each shaft terminates in a long horizontal gallery about 20 to 30 meters in length, running from east to west, although they are not perfectly parallel, seeming cut to avoid the royal well, and each containing a gallery.
I'm going to leave the exploration of the subterranean structures until later in the series, when we're at Saqqara. But the big question is, were these shafts there before the mastaba was built? Or before it was extended? Or part of the upgraded structure? We just don't know. But logic tells me they may have already been in existence. And if they were cut in to avoid the central shaft, then either the galleries were dug sometime after Netjereket, which doesn't ring true, or the underground shaft and its burial chamber could not have been dug for Netjereket. They had to belong to an earlier period. One thing is for sure, it just doesn't add up. But, as I said, we'll leave that until we get to Saqqara later in the series.
The 5 northern shafts and galleries, looted during antiquity, were meant to be used as tombs and as repositories for the funerary furnishings of various members of the royal family, princesses, royal children who had died young, and probably the queen as well. To accommodate them, the mastaba was expanded eastward, becoming slightly longer from east to west than from north to south.
How do we know that? If they were looted and nothing was found, how do we know what was in there? Even if they were tombs for the royal family, we don't.
The other 6 shafts were still undisturbed when modern archaeologists were able to open them. Inside, they discovered a large quantity of dishes from the 1st and 2nd dynasties.
Well, doesn't that support the probability that the wells and galleries were there in the 1st dynasty? It does to me. That large numbers of dishes were found would imply some sort of large feast or celebration took place here, most likely in the 1st dynasty, perhaps around the time of Nana. So does this support the possibility that the pyramid in the compound on the Nama palette is in fact this stepped pyramid? Let's keep examining the evidence.
This modified mastaba would have remained entirely hidden behind the enclosure wall from the inhabitants of Memphis, so Imhotep then conceived the innovative idea of a step monument, a gigantic stairway to the sky that would help the king's soul ascend after death to sojourn among the gods.
Actually, there is no evidence that any of that is true. It's all speculation.
The next stage was to create a 4-step pyramid, P1, that completely encompassed the entire previous mastabas, M1 to M3, and to do so, when the builders began to transform the mastaba into a 4-step pyramid, they made a major shift in construction. Unlike in the construction of the initial mastaba, where they built a crude core of rough stones in horizontal courses, and then cased them in fine limestone with packing in between, for the pyramid layers they built in accretion layers that leaned inwards, using blocks that were both bigger, at 38 centimeters, and of higher quality.
Quite a change in structure, if you ask me, which could indicate the 4-step upgrade happened in another period altogether to when the initial mastaba was built.
Now measuring 85.5 meters by 77 meters and 42 meters high, much of the rock for the pyramid likely quarried from the construction of the Great Trench around the compound, its imposing vertical mass was now visible at a great distance above the enclosure wall.
Totally plausible. But why was the Great Trench created? And when was it created? Wouldn't that give us a clue as to when the pyramid was created?
The resources required to build the 4-step pyramid would thus be far more labor-intensive than those required to build the previous mastaba or monuments of mud brick. This suggests that the state, and therefore the royal government, had a new level of control of resources, both material and human.
Agreed. But was it built when the Egyptologists tell us it was built?
The penultimate stage, Pyramid P2, used 52 centimeter wide limestone blocks to add 2 more steps and take the size of the structure to 119 meters by 107 meters and 60 meters high, with the final stage, P3, involving a further addition of 2 meters to one side and a corresponding 2 meters in height to form the step pyramid we know today, measuring 121 meters by 107 meters and 62 meters high, making the structure even more prominent on the horizon. It is widely accepted that ramps would have been used to raise heavy stone to construct the pyramid, and many plausible models have been suggested. For transport, apparatuses like rollers were used in which the heavy stone could be placed and then rolled.
Well, plausible, perhaps. But given the size of some of the blocks in some of these pyramids, particularly in the substructure, I think the explanation is unlikely. And what if Netjeriket was only responsible for the later modifications to take the structure from a mastaba to a pyramid? Or only one of those modifications, and that all the other building stages happened much earlier, or possibly after? It's all possible, and it all should be considered, especially when you take it in line with the evidence from the subterranean galleries.
The original entrance to the tomb, found near the center on the north side at the first step level of the pyramid, is a descending passage, initially cut as a trench and later as a tunnel, that gave access to the shaft and the tomb.
Which would indicate that the shaft was a much later excavation. But why? Perhaps at some much later stage, some catastrophe happened. The burial chamber was buried by a tsunami, causing parts of the granite walls to be displaced and burying the area in 16 to 20 meters of silt and debris. But when was it buried? More questions for when we get to Saqqara. This may have been around the time of Netjeriket, but it could also have been earlier, around the time of Nama. It would also possibly have been when the first mastaba was commenced.
An extensive network of complex underground galleries, dug at different times, are also located to the north, south, and west of the central burial chamber, those to the west containing a huge maze of deep galleries on 2 levels.
We'll take a good look at those when we get to Saqqara later in the series.
The step pyramid sets the stage for later pyramids of the 4th, 5th, and 6th dynasties, including the Great Pyramids of Giza.
Well, actually, based on the evidence, it does the opposite. It sets the premise that these pyramids, especially the burial chambers, may well predate dynastic Egypt. By how much? That's the question.
Adjacent to the north side of the pyramid, Imhotep erected a funerary temple. To the east he constructed a group of dummy buildings, a Hebset temple and 2 additional buildings, called the South House and the North House, all in disrepair.
Dummy buildings? There must be more to it. And were they all damaged by a tsunami? We'll check them out when we get to Saqqara.
To the south, across the courtyard, are 2 structures, the first being the remains of a chapel, or false palace, made of limestone and containing a fine frieze of Uria, evoking Wadjet, goddess of Buto and protectress of Lower Egypt. From the terrace atop of the structure, immediately to the left of the cobra frieze wall, to the south, is a second deep shaft, 7 meters by 28 meters deep, the same dimensions as the one in the step pyramid. The shaft is part of the second structure, Djoser's second tomb, a prominent oblong superstructure measuring 84 by 12 meters and having a transverse arched roof, whose burial chamber is accessed by stairs in the enclosure wall left of the cobra frieze wall that lead up to the terrace, where, several meters to the west, a stairway cut into the wall's thickness and situated parallel to the enclosure wall between 2 finely built retaining walls dating to the 3rd dynasty, descends eastward. About 15 meters down, the stairs opened to the right on a long storage room, or magazine, which contained a wooden stretcher, box and poles, possibly the disassembled parts of the apparatus used to ritualistically carry a mummy or statue. The staircase continues descending, where about 30 meters down it encounters the maneuver chamber, discovered relatively intact, its walls made of large slabs of fine limestone with the underside of the stone ceiling beams rounded and carved to imitate palm logs and carved with reliefs of stars, the stones possibly the remains of a previous vault.
As I indicated with the step pyramid, it's highly possible they were. But we shall leave further exploration of the subterranean chambers until we get to Saqqara.
An immense enclosure surrounds the complex, the walls nearly 10.5 meters high, fortified and equipped with 211 bastions and a walkway. The exterior decorations of the perimeter wall are of Thinite inspiration, having the same style as the first and second dynasties, with the largest walls decorated with 14 large false doors, plus one real, this one, containing a single passageway only 1 meter wide, the only entrance to the complex.
Thinite designs, the same as the first and second dynasties. Maybe because the compound is from the first dynasty. Maybe this is the compound represented on the Nama palette.
The entire complex was surrounded by a 45-meter wide ditch, the depth still unknown as excavations are not yet completed, although the excavations uncovered architectural elements such as an escarp gallery, proving that the ditch was not a moat.
And that would be consistent with the defences established during the fighting that took place leading up to the unification of Egypt during the time of Nama. We're going to have a much closer look at that when we get to Saqqara later in the series.
Many centuries later, Manetho alludes to architectural advances of this reign, mentioning that Tosorth-Ros discovered how to build with hewn stone, in addition to being remembered as the physician Aesculapius, and for introducing some reforms in the writing system. Modern scholars believe that Manetho originally meant to ascribe these feats to Amuthis, who was later deified as Aesculapius by the Greeks and Romans, and who corresponds to Imhotep, the famous minister of Netjerikit who engineered the step pyramid's construction. Some authorities believe that Imhotep lived into the reign of the pharaoh Huni, possibly even longer. As for Netjerikit, although he seems to have started an unfinished tomb at Abydos in Upper Egypt, he was eventually buried in his famous pyramid at Saqqara in Lower Egypt.
Or was he? Firstly, what if the Abydos structure wasn't a tomb at all? Rather, it was a palace of some sort. And just because someone claims Netjerikit was buried under the step pyramid at Saqqara doesn't mean he actually was. In point of fact, Netjeriket's body has never been discovered. So we have absolutely no idea where he was actually buried.
Manetho states Netjerikit ruled for 29 years, while the Turin King list states it was only for 19 years. It is possible that Manetho's number is a mistake for the earlier Turin King list, and it is also possible that the author of the Turin King list confused the biannual cattle censuses as years, and that Netjerikit actually reigned for 37 or 38 years. Because of his many substantial building projects, particularly at Saqqara, some scholars argue that Netjerikit must have ruled for at least 29 years.
Basically, no one actually knows. What we do know is that Egypt was not the only place where substantial building projects were taking place, because by the start of the Third Dynasty, things regarding stone circles, such as Stonehenge, had started to change.
Back in episode 6 we visited Napto Player, about 100 kilometers west of Abu Simbel, one of the earliest archaeological sites of the Egyptian Neolithic period, and there we took a brief look at an alignment of large megalithic stones, a calendar circle, that some believe represents the approximate direction of the sunrise at the summer solstice, others that it may also have indicated alignments to Arcturus, Alpha Centauri, the belt of Orion, the rising of Sirius around 6088 BC, and other alignments dating to 6270 BC. Others suggest that the circle was a map of Orion at 16,500 BC, and still others that it is a representation of the Milky Way, as it was in 17,500 BC.
Who knows which is correct? But one thing is certain, whoever built it seems to be referring to the night sky. But what specifically were they looking for?
The circle at Nabtar Playa led us to further explore Stonehenge in the last episode, with the earliest structures known in the immediate area supposedly dating to the Mesolithic period between 8,500 and 7,000 BC. You may recall from the last episode, it was approximately 3,500 BC when the Windmill Hill people, one of the first semi-nomadic hunting and gathering groups, began to clear the trees and develop the area, building a complex including a causewayed enclosure at Robin Hood's Bowl, 2 Cursus monuments, Neolithic earthwork enclosures comprising parallel banks, 1. A ditch hewn in the chalk 6 feet deep and wide, 700 meters north of the Stonehenge site on an east-west alignment that was nearly 1.5 miles long and 150 yards wide, along with several large circular furrows and mounds.
As hunter-gatherers, I suggested that it was logical this was simply a ditch to trap animals, most likely deer, that you surrounded them in the forest and you corralled the deer towards the awaiting trap.
That was further developed around 2700 BC, when a henge, a circular banked earthwork enclosure made of late Cretaceous Seaford chalk, measuring about 110 meters in diameter, was added, and an internal ditch about 6 feet deep was dug, with the chalk dug from the ditch piled up to make the bank on the inside, with a large entrance created by a gap in the ditch and bank to the northeast and a smaller entrance to the south, most likely for the humans to use to enter and exit. Around 5 meters inside the monument's bank, a circle of 56 evenly distributed pits, known as the Aubrey holes, were dug, the pits possibly primed with sharpened spears to form a perfect hunting trap.
That was around 2700 BC, but it wasn't the only stone circle around at the time.
The stone circles at the heart of Neolithic Orkney and Skara Brae, such as the Ring of Brodgar, the northernmost circle henge in Britain, standing on a small isthmus between the lochs of Stennis and Harray, and the standing stones of Stennis, just over a mile away, are respectively known as the Temple of the Sun and Moon, and, although completely structurally different, are, date-wise, approximately contemporary with the mastabers of the first and second dynasties of ancient Egypt. But as far as stone circles dating back to the Neolithic period go, these are just 2 of well over 1,300 ancient megalithic sites, some of 2 or more stone circles set within one another, that have been discovered all over the world.
Of course, if the Nabta Playa circle does reflect the Milky Way, as it was in 17,500 BC, then that pushes the dating of that circle and possibly many others well back into the Mesolithic period.
Most of the megalithic circles so far discovered are located in and around northern Europe and the European Atlantic fringe, such as the Almendras Cromlech, near Évora in Portugal, where villagers call the circles Myru Barretts or Gentile Barretts, referring to mythological giants of the pre-Christian era.
Is that just a coincidence? When you consider the possibility that Nama, the first king of the first dynasty of ancient Egypt, was a giant? I don't think that's a coincidence at all. I think it's a co-incident, which means it is possible these stone circles were built by Thinite kings, perhaps even earlier during the era of the Memphite kings, or even earlier still by the demigod descendants of the followers of Horus. It's possible the pieces seem to fit together, but we need more evidence.
The stone circles stretch eastward throughout continental Europe, starting with 49 in France, including several in the south on the Cours de Blanders in the Cevennes, others in the Pyrenees, the Petit Saint Bernard in the French Alps, and more in Brittany, including 2 on the island of Erlanek and 2 more suggested at the Carnac complex, one of the highest concentrations of megalithic activity in all Europe, located at the unique latitude on the Earth at which the solstice sun, both summer and winter, forms a perfect Pythagorean triangle relative to the parallel of latitude, that is to the east-west equinoctial axis of the site, with suggestions the stones thus acted as calendars and a huge lunar observatory, so that ancient farmers knew when to plant and harvest seasonal crops and that priests could foretell eclipses of the sun and moon.
But for now, their true purpose is a mystery. Perhaps because the Earth does not have the same alignment now as it did when they were built. And more on that as our series progresses.
Further eastwards, there is one notable stone circle in the Italian Alps, large erect stone circles near Ballenstedt in Germany, Odry in Poland, Atlachiam in Israel, Rujm el-Hayri in Syria, Dolny Glarvanak Kromlek, and Begliktash near the Black Sea in Bulgaria, China, Hong Kong, the Oi stone circles in Karzuno, northern Japan, and even as far afield as Brazil and Australia. Southwards, circles, such as Mzora Kromlek, have been discovered in Morocco, Buko in northeastern Somalia, others in Senegal and Gambia, and Embredirho in the Ethiopian and Eritrean highlands. Whilst heading north, up into the British Isles, there are 6 in the Channel Islands, 4 on Guernsey and 2 on Jersey, 343 on the island of Ireland. Widely distributed across the island in for main concentrations, 103 in the Cork area, including the Drumbeg Stone Circle and the Carry-Gagular complex, 20 in County Kerry, including the Ken Mary Stone Circle, 11 in County Mayo and to the north in Mid-Ulster. There are 81 stone circles in Wales, such as Bryn Cadair Fainer and Moel Taiw Chaff, 316 spread across England, including Avebury and Stonehenge in the south, and Castlerigg and Swinside in Cumbria, and a massive 508 sites recorded in Scotland, including the Easter Achorthy Stone Circle located in Aberdeen, the Ring of Bogger and Standing Stones of Stennis in Orkney, and the 19 stone circles on Arran.
There are far too many stone circles for us to consider. That would be a whole new series. So let's just cherry pick a few. Swinside, Easter Achorthys, Avebury, and of course Stonehenge.
The Swinside Ring has a diameter of about 26.8 metres and was constructed from around 60 stones of local slate, although there are now 55 stones. An entrance exit was included on the monument's southeastern side, which was defined by the inclusion of 2 outer portal stones. The stones used in the construction of Swinside were porphyritic slate collected from the adjacent fells, and are of the type that was known locally as the grey cobbles by the 20th century.
Porphyritic slate?
Porphyritic meaning relating to, or denoting, a rock texture containing distinct crystals or crystalline particles embedded in a compact ground mass.
Crystals? Interesting.
Slate is the finest grained, foliated, homogeneous metamorphic rock composed mainly of clay minerals, volcanic ash or micas, depending upon the degree of metamorphism to which it has been subjected, the original clay minerals in shale altering to micas through increasing levels of heat and pressure. Mica has several unique physical properties. It has superior electrical properties as an insulator and as a dielectric, and can support an electrostatic field while dissipating minimal energy in the form of heat, but is stable when exposed to electricity, light, moisture, and extreme temperatures up to 500 degrees Celsius, and is resistant to corona discharge.
Is there something to that? Is that why they chose these particular stones? Who knows? There does appear to be some reason, and is that reason somehow related to the function of the circle, whatever that was?
Mica is particularly prominent in many granites, pegmatites, and schists, and large individual crystals of mica, or books, several feet across, have been found that exhibit large interlocking crystals, with most pegmatites, composed of quartz, feldspar, and mica, having a similar silicic composition as granite. Slate can also contain abundant quartz and small amounts of feldspar, calcite, pyrite, hematite, and other minerals.
Remember in the last episode when we looked at the composition of red granite?
Red granite is coarse-grained felsic intrusive igneous rock containing around 72% silicates as SiO4 as well as silicon dioxide, SiO2, comprising between 20% and 60% quartz by volume, as well as mica, and at least 35% feldspar.
And silicon. It's what we store memory on in computers. So are these stone circles some sort of ancient storage device of knowledge? Or some sort of ancient computer? Or are they an advanced computer, using the energy of the sun for data storage? Or as thought transfer machines? Or portals for the exchange of consciousness, perhaps? Let's keep looking.
The Easter Achorthy stone circle, standing on a gentle hill slope about 1.6 kilometres west of Inverurie in northeast Scotland, is one of the best preserved examples of a recumbent stone circle, and the only one that has a full complement of its stones still standing. It consists of a ring of 9 stones, 8 of which are grey granite, and 1 red jasper with 2 more grey granite stones flanking a recumbent of red granite flecked with crystals and lines of quartz.
And there we have the use of granite again, both grey and red, with the red granite used as the keystone, just as it is used in ancient Egypt. I'm sorry, but that is not just a coincidence. But why use red jasper instead of red granite?
Measuring 6.5 to 7 on the Mohs scale for hardness, red jasper is a hexagonal microcrystalline silicate and member of the quartz family, its chemical composition including silicon dioxide.
There it is again, silicon dioxide.
The red hue of red jasper is due to high levels of iron in the opaque and trigonal silicon dioxide crystal of the stone.
Iron, which is very important for the hemoglobin in our blood. But I think we need a lot more information, a lot more evidence before we designate these stone circles as blood donation sites or sacrificial sites for the Red Cross.
Red jasper is an ancient and sacred stone that has held thousands of purported uses and meanings throughout dozens of cultures across the globe since the beginning of recorded history, where the ancient Egyptians believed the stone was related to the blood of Mother Earth, Mother Isis.
Hence why nowadays it's used to detoxify the circulatory system and the blood, remove blockages from bile ducts, support and cleanse the liver of toxins, and for treating anemia. It's also claimed to be effective facilitating childbirth by speeding up contractions and for reducing blood loss. But surely the circle was not constructed and used as a place for women to give birth. It's possible, but unlikely.
Often incorporated into amulets throughout human history, red jasper has been revered and celebrated as a protective force, ridding people, places, and items of negative vibrations and evil spirits, including the negative effects of unwanted electromagnetic frequencies, as well as being used as a protective shield for shamanic journeys, astral travel, and to encourage, embellish, and boost dream recall.
Again, we come back to the possibility that these stone circles were portals for some sort of transfer of consciousness or of awareness. Let's see what evidence there is at Avebury.
One of the best known prehistoric sites in Britain, Avebury, in southwest England, is one of a group of monumental sites that were established in this region during the Neolithic period and contains one of the largest megalithic stone circles in the world. Constructed over several hundred years in the 3rd millennium BC, the monument comprises a large nearly circular bank averaging around 347 metres in diameter, with an internal ditch, followed by a large outer stone circle 331.6 metres in diameter, comprising an original 98 Saracen standing stones, some weighing in excess of 40 tons. The stones varying in height from 3.6 to 4.2 meters, erected either contemporary with or built around 4 or 5 centuries after the earthworks. Further inside, nearer the middle of the monument, are 2 separate smaller stone circles, the northern ring 98 meters in diameter, but with only 2 of its 4 standing stones remaining upright. A cove of 3 stones stood in the middle, its entrance facing northeast. The available radiocarbon dating evidence suggests that the henge was made by the middle of the 3rd millennium BC, with some stone settings indicating a construction date of around 2870 to 2200 BC. Most archaeologists believe it was around this time, around the middle of the 3rd millennium BC, that the community stopped building the large chambered tombs for the dead, and, instead, they began the construction of large wooden and stone circles, the change from building tombs to building open-air rings signaling a change in the religious beliefs of the people of northwestern Europe.
I'm not so easily convinced.
Although many theories have been advanced to explain their use, there is no consensus among archaeologists as to their intended function, although, taking experiments undertaken at the megalithic ring of Brogger in Orkney as a basis, several archaeologists believe that any sounds produced inside of Barry's inner circles would have created an echo as sound waves ricocheted off the standing stones.
So, is there also a functional aspect of these circles that relates to sound waves, or even to thought waves? Was the building of the stone circles to focus thought waves as a means to open some sort of dimensional portal? Maybe Stonehenge has some answers.
When we left Stonehenge in episode 6, sometime around 2700 BC, at the end of the Second Dynasty in ancient Egypt, Stonehenge was simply a henge made of late Cretaceous seaford chalk that formed a circular banked earthwork enclosure about 110 meters in diameter, with an internal ditch about 6 feet deep, with the chalk dug from the ditch piled up to make the bank on the inside, and a circle of 56 evenly distributed pits, known as the Aubrey holes, that may have been primed with sharpened spears to form a perfect hunting trap. In 2013, a team of archaeologists excavated more than 50,000 cremated bone fragments belonging to 63 individuals, almost equally men and women, but with some children, who had originally been buried in the Aubrey holes, with radiocarbon dating of the remains putting the date of the site to around 3000 BC, meaning the hunter-gatherers may not only have been there for some 300 years, but they may even have been cannibals.
But, according to the archaeologists, sometime between 2700 BC and 2500 BC, all of that started to change.
Although they may have been at the site as early as 3000 BC, archaeological excavations and radiocarbon dating suggests that around 2600 BC, the builders abandoned timber in favor of stone, and that a double ring, 2 concentric arrays of holes, was dug in the center of the site.
Now to me, 2 concentric circles enables comparison. It enables perspective, but more importantly, it enables alignment. But with what? There are theories Stonehenge was an astronomy, aligning solstices, etc. But that's a lot of trouble for a single alignment of the rising and setting of the sun at the summer and winter solstices. There has to be more to it.
The first bluestones at Stonehenge were erected some time later, between 2500 and 2200 BC, most likely by the Bellbeaker people, who had supposedly migrated from mainland Europe.
But is it also possible that before then they had migrated to Europe from the other side of the Mediterranean Sea, from Egypt? After all, evidence indicates they were also on Sicily and Sardinia. And as there was great turmoil in Egypt at the time, is it possible they may have fled from Egypt? And did they bring with them not only the technology, but the capability to mine the bluestones, transport them, and erect them.
The term bluestone is a convenience label rather than a geological term, since at least 20 different rock types are represented. One of the most common rocks in the assemblage is known as Preseli-spotted dolerite, a chemically altered porphyritic metamorphic igneous rock, equivalent to basalt in composition, and harder than granite, comprising plagioclase felspar and pyroxene, and which often include quartz.
That sounds very similar to the porphyritic stones at Swinside. And I don't want us to get too caught up in the geology, well, not at this point in the series, but let's at least examine what plagioclase and pyroxenes are.
Plagioclase is a series of tectosilicate minerals within the felspar group, and pyroxenes are a group of important rock-forming inosilicates minerals found in many igneous and metamorphic rocks.
Okay, so there's that reference to silicon again. Now, we probably all know that all life on Earth is based on carbon, but there has also been lots of scientific speculation that because silicon sits below carbon on the periodic table and has similar valency properties, that more advanced silicon-based life forms might exist somewhere in the universe. However, while I think there might be something well worth exploring there, it's not really the focus of this series, as broad as that is. Enough to say that the high levels of silicon and silicon dioxide in these stones may have been a key reason why these stones were selected.
The holes held up to 80 standing stones, generally accepted to have been transported from the Preseli Hills, 240 kilometres away in modern-day Pembrokeshire in Wales, and estimated to have been placed in their new destination around 2300 BC, each monolith measuring around 2 metres in height, between 1 to 1.5 metres wide and just under a metre thick, and weighing between 2 and 4 tons each, only 43 of which can be traced today.
Okay, 240 kilometres. Each one 2 to 4 tons. And then you have to place them in a particular position. Even today, that would be a massive effort, let alone for the Belbeca people, supposedly a small tribe of hunter-gatherers with flint knives and spears. But it wouldn't be such a task for a more advanced group of demigod giants, such as the Thinite kings, or the followers of Horus. So could the construction and placement of these stones have anything to do with another future expected return of those same followers of Horus? Did the knowledge come from Egypt? We shall have to wait and see.
Around the time the bluestones were erected, the avenue, a grand-scale parallel pair of ditches and banks leading nearly 3 kilometres from the River Avon to the northeastern entrance of Stonehenge, was begun, this orientation suggesting that ancient astronomers may have used Stonehenge as a kind of solar calendar, aligned on the midsummer sunrise, to track the movement of the sun and moon and mark the changing seasons.
Clearly, this northeast-southwest alignment has some particular significance. But was it, as is suggested by some archaeologists, built in alignment with the solstice and equinox points by a society dependent on the seasons and the success of agriculture? It seems a rather extravagant excess when planting a simple tree in the distance would do the job.
Although it cannot be accurately dated, the heel stone was erected in the middle of the avenue. When viewed from the centre of the stone circle, it shows the direction of the midsummer sunrise.
And that really confirms my point.
Immediately within the bank, just inside the northeastern entrance, were 2, or possibly 3, large standing stones, one of which, known as the Slaughter Stone, 4.9 metres long, now remains lying on the ground. The tall altar stone also made its appearance at this early stage.
Okay, clearly the Slaughter Stone and the altar stone had some significance. But was it to the summer and winter solstices? I doubt it. But why? because quite simply, the heel stone seemed to have had that covered. So what were they there for?
This phase of the monument was abandoned unfinished. Even so, the monument appears to have eclipsed the site at Avebury in importance towards the end of this phase.
Clearly, it was important. But was it unfinished? That seems unlikely. Maybe it was finished, for the purpose it was intended at the time. Perhaps Stonehenge was not so much a calendar. It was an extravagant investment for a simple calendar, but more so it was a clock that foretold not just the time of the solstices, but future solar and lunar eclipses. But maybe it was built to mark the time of something else, something that was still yet to come. And we'll get to that in a later episode. Meanwhile, back in ancient Egypt, the third dynasty rolled on.
While it was known there was a successor to Netjerikit, Sekhemkhet's name was unknown until 1951, when Zachariah Ghanem discovered the levelled foundation and vestiges of an unfinished step pyramid at Saqqara. The relationship between Sekhemkhet, also known under his unusual Nibti name Djoser Teti, and his predecessor, Netjerikit, is not known, although it is believed he was probably either the brother or eldest son of King Netjerikit.
Given the length of Netjeriket's reign, my guess is that Sekhemkhet was most likely Netjeriket's eldest son, but who really knows?
Several clay seals presenting Sekhemkhet's Nibti name, Djoser Teti, together with Sekhemkhet's Horus name, were found at the eastern excavation site on the island of Elephantine. But, apart from that, little is known about activities conducted during Sekhemkhet's reign. The only preserved documents showing his name were found on 2 rock inscriptions at Wadi Magare in the Sinai Peninsula. The first inscription shows 2 images of Sekhemkhet, one wearing the Hedjet crown, the other wearing the Deshret crown. The second inscription depicts Sekhemkhet in the now familiar smiting the enemy pose. The presence of these reliefs suggests the Wadi Magara mines of copper and turquoise were exploited during Sekhemkhet's reign. Sekhemkhet's wife may have been Jerseret Nepti, but this name appears without any queen's title, and Egyptologists dispute the true meaning and reading of this name. And, although Sekhemkhet surely had sons and daughters, up to this date no personal names have been found. Sekhemkhet's pyramid, sometimes referred to as the buried pyramid as it is almost completely swamped in sand, lies southwest of Netjeriket's complex, and why Sekhemkhet chose this site for his pyramid is a bit of a mystery, as the pyramid was built upon uneven rock and the builders were forced to level the terrain, building large terraces, some of which were more than 10 meters high.
Some suggest it was because of the nearby Second Dynasty royal tombs. And they may be right, but who would build their tombs next to the tombs of people that they probably weren't even related to? There must be some other reason. Maybe, assuming the location of the Netjeriket pyramid was in reality the site of Nama's palace, or the unification of Egypt, it was to be close to that. Or maybe it was never built by Sekhemkhet, which is where I've got my money, and that the location is something to do with all of the pyramids, which we'll get to in a later episode.
It is assumed this was a 3rd dynasty pyramid because the ornamented outer enclosure wall, about 10 meters tall and cased in fine white limestone, with rows of deep niches alternating in regular intervals with false doors, with a walkway, sentry posts and probably only one real door in the entire complex, which has never been found, was very similar to the nearby enclosure wall Netjeriket had built for his complex.
No folks, this was a 3rd dynasty wall, because the facade of the perimeter wall was very similar to the supposed 3rd dynasty wall of the Netjeriket complex. The construction of the pyramid was a totally different matter. And as for the subterranean chambers, I'm sure that will prove to be a whole other story. What it means is, if the Egyptologists have the date and attribution of the Nett-Jereket pyramid totally wrong, then this one is incorrect as well. In fact, I believe the chances the buried pyramid was built by Sekhemkhet are less than those of the Eiffel Tower being built by Bob the Builder, as the only evidence of Sekhemkhet's existence outside of this unfinished buried pyramid is the military scene of Sekhemkhet with his raised mace about to smite his desert enemies at Wadi Magara. There is no actual evidence Sekhemkhet was ever buried here.
Like that of the Nett-Jereket, Sekhemkhet's pyramid was originally planned as a step pyramid upon a square base with sides of 115 to 119 meters, and, like the Nett-Jereket's pyramid, it is built of limestone blocks.
There is actually no evidence it was planned as a step pyramid at all. What if it had been planned as a mastaba all along?
Only the first step of the pyramid was completed, possibly because of the pharaoh's sudden death, leaving a monument in the shape of a large mastaba.
Why is it that the Egyptologists believe that there are so many unfinished pyramids? I guess it's just a convenient excuse to justify your beliefs as to who built them and when they were built.
There were probably no more than a few courses of masonry, and it was maybe only 7 meters high at its highest point, but if it had been completed, it would have had 6 or 7 steps and a final height of 73 meters, making it larger than Nett-Jereket's.
The truth is, they didn't know how many steps were intended. It could have been 6. It may only have been 3 and been a mastaba. But what if it was completed? How do we know Sekhemkhet didn't just want a simple mastaba, and it was in fact planned from the outset as a mastaba? How do we even know it was built as a tomb? We don't. Where is the evidence that it was ever intended to be anything other than what it is now? There isn't any.
From its design and an inscription from his pyramid at Saqqara, it is thought that Nett-Jereket's famous architect Imhotep had a hand in the design of this pyramid, as it was, like the step pyramid of Nett-Jereket next door.
Well, whoever designed and built one most likely designed and built the other. But was that Imhotep? And was it in the 3rd dynasty? The evidence on the Nama palette would indicate it may not have been. But let's move on. We can look at that in greater depth later in the series.
It was constructed using the accretion layer method, where the stones are laid inwards at an angle of 15 degrees, with sloping courses of relatively small stone blocks laid at right angles to the incline. But, since the pyramid was left unfinished, there was never any casing applied.
Maybe it wasn't the original structure that was left unfinished. Rather, it was the repairs and reconstruction that was left incomplete. And which used the accretion method? The original or the repair job?
Mostly concealed beneath sand dunes, it was first excavated in 1952, an open passage on the northern side of the pyramid discovered blocked by an intact wall.
Had it been sealed over? If so, why?
The entrance leads down for 30 meters before intersecting with a vertical shaft that opens on the top of the first step. Found within the shaft were the bones of various animals, including cattle, rams and gazelles, and 62 papyri from the 26th dynasty, written during the reign of Ahmose II. Below these were around 700 stone vessels and a gold treasure cache from the 3rd dynasty, no doubt a part of Sekhemkhet's funerary goods, but how it ended up at the bottom of the shaft rather than stolen with the rest of the tomb's content remains a mystery.
Well, firstly, though it dates to the 3rd dynasty, it doesn't mean it was part of Sekhemkhet's funerary goods. And what proof is there that anything was stolen from the subterranean chambers? Nil. Secondly, it certainly doesn't mean the pyramid belongs to Sekhemkhet either. If they hadn't found the treasure, the very same logic may have led them to determine that the pyramid was built by Ahmose II in the 26th dynasty.
The main corridor continues to descend, and it was here, somewhere after the vertical shaft, that an ivory plaque bearing the form of Sekhemkhet's Saqqara king list name of Djoser T, along with clay vessel stoppers bearing Sekhemkhet's name were discovered, part of the reason why we attribute the pyramid to him.
Look, it's not very strong evidence. Just because it was found there doesn't mean that it belongs there, or that it was a tomb. I mean, seriously, that would be like me leaving a bottle of scotch next to Stonehenge and saying it was built by Johnny Walker as a graveyard. But let's see what other evidence we discover when we visit Saqqara later in the series.
Outside of the pyramid, within the complex and to the south, just as in the case of Djoser's complex, there is also a symbolic south tomb, the superstructure consisting of a mastaba built of limestone blocks with an entrance on the west side, again like in Djoser's complex.
What we can deduce is that it's more than likely that the two complexes and the two south tombs were probably contemporary with each other. When that was, we don't know.
Facing northwest, the pyramid courtyard was surrounded by a niched enclosure wall 563 meters long, 185 meters wide and 10 meters high. The facade ornamented with deep niches very similar to the wall surrounding the Djoser complex,
which supports the proposition that they're contemporary with the first dynasty, not the third.
Egyptologists and archaeologists are convinced that once upon a time a mortuary temple and a serdab existed, but were destroyed due to the looting of stone from his cult buildings in antiquity.
Convinced by what? There's absolutely no evidence that a mortuary temple or a serdab ever existed. Still, even just to be sure, I think the buried pyramid deserves a close inspection. But later in the series, when we get to Saqqara.
Most Egyptologists are of the opinion that Sekhemkhet probably died in some remote expedition or battle, and that his body was never again seen.
This is a perfect example of how some, if not most, Egyptologists use one false premise to support another false premise of Sekhemkhet's attempted pyramid as evidence to support another unfounded theory that he died in battle, and vice versa. It's a total insult to proper scientific methodology and should assign the majority of Egyptologists to the same gaggle as fortune tellers, religious zealots and snake oil sellers. Wouldn't it be novel to just look at the actual evidence?
Sekhemkhet is thought to have reigned for a brief period of 6 to 7 years, from about 2648 to 2640 BC, before he was succeeded by the next on the king's list, Sanacht or Nebkar. Also known as Sanacht, not much is known of Nebkar's reign, apart from the presence of two relief fragments depicting Sanacht in the Sinai at Wadi Maghara, along with those of Net-Jeriket and Sekhemkhet, that suggest an important Egyptian presence there during the Third Dynasty.
As I said earlier, they were probably the same person, so it's more than likely that Sanacht ruled earlier as Nebkar.
The location of Sanacht's tomb has long been thought to be the large mastaba K2 at Beit Khalaf, as excavations there yielded relief fragments bearing his name. However, in the mastaba were found the skeletal remains of a man over 1.87 meters tall, considerably taller than the 1.67 meter average of later and prehistoric Egyptians.
Considerably. He would have been seen as a giant. Was this because he was descended from the Thinite kings, who, like Nama, towered above mortal humans? Or was there even more to it?
Myths abound with stories of giants, from the frost and fire giants of Norse legends to the titans who warred with the gods in ancient Greek mythology. However, giants are more than just myth. Accelerated and excessive growth, a condition known as gigantism, can occur when the body generates too much growth hormone. This usually occurs because of a tumor on the pituitary gland of the brain. The specimen's skull was also very large and capacious, and in addition, his cranial index was unusually broad and almost brachycephalic, the shape of a skull shorter than typical for its species, although the proportions of his long bones were tropically adapted like those of most other ancient Egyptians, especially those from the pre-dynastic period. His overall cranial features, however, were closer to those of dynastic period Egyptian skulls.
An interesting mix, and mix being the relevant aspect.
In 2017, an international team of researchers concluded that the alleged remains of Sennacht are clearly the oldest case of gigantism in the world.
Gigantism? Seriously? I wonder if they did a DNA test. Did they find Denisovan DNA perhaps? Or perhaps the missing unknown humanin DNA? We know giants once walked the earth. Take Goliath, for instance, who was slain by the diminutive David. And yes, I will look at that in more detail in a later episode. Well, Goliath, as well as being 12 or more feet tall, was said to have had 6 fingers and toes on each limb and 2 rows of teeth. I would hardly label that as gigantism. But I digress.
The penultimate ruler of the Third Dynasty was Karbar, his name typically displayed within a Ser-ek rather than the more typical cartouche form established by the end of this dynasty, and written using the sign of a rising sun that had the sound value of Kar, and a saddle-billed stork that had the sound value of Bar. Karbar is mentioned in the Turin king list as erased, which may imply that there were dynastic problems during his reign, or that the scribe working on this list was unable to fully decipher the name from the more ancient records from which he was copying. In 2010, a previously unknown mud brick mastaba was discovered in Kesner. Excavations of the mastaba in 2014 revealed a tiny mud seal fragment containing the king's name. However, the true owner of the tomb is unconfirmed and archaeological excavations are still ongoing. However, his name is archaeologically well attested, appearing as a Ser-ek on 9 polished stone bowls, variously made of magnesite, travertine, and diorite, which were found at the archaeological locales of Zoriet El Arin, Abu Sir, and Nargar ed Dir. In addition, his name also appears on several mud seal impressions discovered at Kesner in the Nile Delta, Zoriet El Arin, and Hierakonpolis, but most of which were excavated at modern-day Elephantine Island. The seal impressions reveal that the seals and their belonging vessels originated from Thinis and that they were registered by the governor of Elephantine, which seems to indicate that Elephantine Island must have been an important place to visit during Karbar's time.
And we shall take a closer look at the ruins on Elephantine Island later.
Based on the stone bowls and vases bearing Karbar's Ser-ek, discovered about 200 meters north of the pyramid in Mastaba Z500, the majority of modern scholars believe that Mastaba Z500 was in fact a mortuary temple belonging to the funerary complex of the Layered Pyramid, and that the Layered Pyramid was most probably built by King Karbar in the late Third Dynasty as his tomb.
That's hardly concrete evidence. In fact, it's pretty scant if you ask me. The problem is, again, no body, no evidence, it's just massive speculation.
And because many of these artifacts were discovered at the unfinished Layered Pyramid nearby, many Egyptologists and archaeologists propose that it was built by Karbar and was his tomb.
The difficulty is, there's not 1 ounce of evidence to support the conjecture. It's an educated guess. And that guess is based on preconceived perceptions and beliefs, be they right or wrong. That said, let's take a look at it.
The Layered Pyramid lies close to the necropolis of Zoriet El Arin, 8 kilometers southwest of Gezer, and 7 kilometers north of Saqqara, its main structure located on a rock ridge just above the floodplain. The architecture of the pyramid is very similar to the step pyramids of Djoser and especially that of the buried pyramid of King Sekhemkhet, some Egyptologists suggesting the Layered Pyramid is an advanced version of the buried pyramid of Sekhemkhet, and for these reasons is firmly datable to the Third Dynasty.
That's if The step pyramid and the buried pyramid do in fact date to the 3rd dynasty, and there is no irrefutable evidence that they do.
The layered pyramid has a square base about 84 meters long, slightly smaller than the step pyramids of Djoser and Sekhemkhet, and 2 steps, reaching a height of about 17 meters. However, if originally planned to comprise 5 steps, it would have reached around 42 to 45 meters in height.
Yes, if. What if it was only ever planned to have 2 steps? What if it was only ever meant to be a mastaba?
The current ruined state of the pyramid allows a view of its core, which is an 11 square meter pyramidal mound made of poor quality rough stone blocks taken from the local bedrock.
Not really advanced engineering or technical skills needed for that.
This core is surrounded by a 2.6 meter thick casing of the same masonry. This is in turn surrounded by 14 layers of mud bricks with an inward vertical inclination angle of 68 degrees, bonded with clay mortar. Just as with the innermost stone casing of the pyramid's core, each mud brick layer is 2.6 meters thick.
Why the shift to mud brick? Surely stone would be much stronger. And it certainly reflects a far lesser technical capability. Perhaps the mud brick casing was a later attempt to repair or renovate the structure.
Some Egyptologists have suggested the mud bricks found at the base of the pyramid are not part of the pyramid itself, but the remnants of a construction ramp.
A ramp to where? The structure is only 2 steps, and it would hardly have been worthwhile in the effort constructing it.
No traces of outer cladding stones has been found, suggesting it has been eroded over time, or there never was one because the pyramid was not completed. But whether the pyramid was finished or left unfinished is disputed among Egyptologists.
Eroded by what? Wind and sand? A massive surging torrent of water, perhaps? But when? And what if it was neither eroded nor unfinished? What if it was finished?
The entrance to the subterranean structures lies unusually to the northeast of the pyramid, some Egyptologists suggesting this was to free the north side of the pyramid for the construction of a temple.
It's possible, but it doesn't make sense to me. What does make sense is that the temple was built after the entrance was built. Simple as that. And because the entrance gave easy access to the storerooms located immediately beneath it.
The layout of the underground chambers is extremely similar to that found in the buried pyramid of Sekhemkhet, a corridor leading into the interior containing 32 side chambers meant for storage of the burial equipment. This suggests that the 2 pyramids must have been constructed very close in time.
No, it suggests that the substructures may have been built around the same time, but not necessarily the superstructures that were above them.
The entrance immediately leads to a 36-meter-long steep stairway, and then down onto an unfinished corridor which heads west. The corridor ends in a straight vertical shaft, at the top of which is the so-called upper corridor, also an unfinished passage, which goes south toward the center of the pyramid. At the bottom of the shaft is a T-shaped crossway, to the right, and the north is a U-shaped gallery system resembling a cone, similar to that in the buried pyramid of Sekhemkhet, comprising rows of rough-hewn chambers, 32 in total, possibly storage rooms for funerary goods. To the left, the corridor leads south to the lower corridor, halfway becoming a narrow stairway, so narrow that a sarcophagus could hardly have been passed through it. The lower corridor, also unfinished, then finishes 26 meters below ground with the king's burial chamber, 3.63 meters by 2.65 meters, with a ceiling height of 3 meters. Inside were no traces of a sarcophagus, which, together with the absence of any artifacts in any of the galleries, suggests that either the pyramid was not used to bury a pharaoh, or it was abandoned following the premature death of the king.
Or it was never built for that purpose.
Unfortunately, since 1970, The pyramid now lies within a restricted military area, and consequently no excavation has been undertaken there since Reisner and Fisher's superficial work over 100 years ago in 1911, leaving the structures beneath the pyramid in doubt, and the pyramid itself now having succumbed to the sands of the desert.
That's a great way to conceal the truth. Make it a military zone so no one can get access to it. We're talking about important ancient history here. Why would they not even allow archaeologists in to work there? It makes you wonder what is really below the sand.
The layered pyramid is surrounded by a total of 5 cemeteries dating to the 1st Dynasty, 2nd Dynasty, late 3rd Dynasty, 18th Dynasty, and Roman period. Of these cemeteries, only the one, dating to the late 3rd Dynasty, contains large tombs, of which 4 are mud brick mastabas.
Firstly, if it was surrounded, that would imply that the pyramid was there first. That means before the 1st Dynasty, or at least before the 2nd, as it could have been built contemporary with the 1st Dynasty, which is what the evidence at Saqqara shows. Secondly, there's the fact that all these 3rd Dynasty mastabas were made of mud brick, like the surrounding layers of the pyramid, but no stone. Was it repair work? And if all of these cemeteries and mastabas have survived, why haven't we found one single palace? One single administrative building or residence? Anyway, we will have a close look at this extraordinary structure, especially what lays beneath the ground, later in the series.
At the eastern side of the pyramid, the remnants of brick walls could indicate the presence of a mortuary temple, but the archaeological traces are so tenuous that any closer examination and more precise reconstruction today is impossible.
Primarily because the pyramid now lies in a restricted military area.
The same goes for the ruins of a building several hundred meters away from the pyramid, which might have been the Valley Temple. If this was indeed a valley temple, its east-west orientation would be unique in all pyramid complexes.
Not if it aligned with a previous western branch of the Nile.
The funerary complex of the layered pyramid shows no trace of an enclosure wall, which is present in both earlier and later pyramid complexes. This could be because the stones constituting the wall were robbed over time, or simply because the wall was never started, being usually the last element of the pyramid complex to be built.
There are those stone thieves again. They just wander in the middle of the night, totally unnoticed by the priests and by the guards, and they pop a few thousand 2 to 3 ton blocks into their pockets and disappear into the night. What if the walls were washed away?
The actual duration of Karber's reign is unknown, anywhere from 6 to 24 years depending who you choose to believe, and it has also been suggested that Karber may be the Horus name of the last king of the 3rd Dynasty, Huni, and that the 2 kings are the same person.
Sometimes I feel like we're researching Where's Waldo? But at least with Where's Waldo we know what we're looking for.
The final ruler of the 3rd Dynasty was Huni, seen by scholars as a confusing figure in Egyptian history, because next to nothing is known of Huni's time on the throne, no religious activities, nor military activities, nothing. Although he was long remembered in Egyptian traditions, he is not a well-attested pharaoh, with only a few documents, objects, or monuments having endured. In fact, there are only 2 contemporary objects that bear his name. The first is a conical stele, 1.6 meters long, 0.7 to 0.5 meters in diameter, and made of red granite, discovered in 1909 on the island of Elephantine. Its shape resembling a typical Benben stellar as known from the mastaba tombs of the early dynastic kings. At the front, the cone presents a rectangular niche, with a carved inscription inside that mentions a royal palace named Palace of the Headband of Huni, with Huni's name above, inside a royal cartouche. Because it was found very close to a stepped pyramid, some Egyptologists propose it held a position on the very front of the monument, or even visibly embedded in one of the steps.
By that logic, if I found a can of Pepsi outside the Taj Mahal, I could deduce the white marble tomb was built by an Indian Mughal emperor called Pepsi.
However, it might be at least possible that the granite cone of Huni was reused many times in later times, finding its way to Elephantine when Ramesside priests restored cultic places of the Old Kingdom period.
Who knows?
The second finding, discovered in 2007, is a polished stone bowl made of magnesite, found at South Arbusir in the mastaba tomb of an unknown high official, containing an inscription that mentions Huni's name but without a cartouche. Beyond that, the cartouche of Huni is first mentioned on the back of the Palermo stone in the section concerning the reign of the 5th dynasty king, Neferu Kari Kakei, who apparently had a mortuary temple built for the cult of Huni. The temple, however, has not yet been located.
Buried or washed away.
Huni's cartouche can also be found in both the Saqqara king list and the Turin canon, both dating back to the 19th dynasty, although has mysteriously been omitted from the Abydos king list, which also dates to the 19th dynasty, and replaced by Neferkara I, who is unknown to Egyptologists.
Well, given the Horus name of Huni is unknown, surely it's possible that Neferkara was Huni's Horus name, especially as the Egyptologists can't find any reference to a Neferkara. I mean, it's not rocket science.
In the late 1960s, a limestone stela of unknown provenance, and inscribed with the previously unknown Horus name, Kerhejet, was purchased by the Louvre Museum. Important to Egyptian art historians because it depicts the earliest representation of a god, Horus, embracing the king. It is very similar in style to the relief panels of the step pyramid of Netjerikit, though the execution of the carving is superior, and the iconography is more developed. Egyptologists thus favor a date for the stela at the end of the 3rd dynasty. Furthermore, as the Horus names for all the kings who preceded Huni have been tentatively identified, some scholars believe Kerhejet to be Huni's Horus name, though this is uncertain.
It sounds logical to me, especially when you factor in that no one actually knows how to translate the Egyptian symbols correctly. It's all a guess.
Many Egyptologists believe that Huni was the father and direct predecessor of King Sneferu, as contemporary and later documents often mention Huni and his follower Sneferu in the same sentence, and always in direct succession. A key figure in this case is Queen Mersint I, the royal mother of Sneferu. She definitely bore the title of a queen, but no contemporary source connects her name with the title of a daughter or wife of Huni, and this raises doubts of any family relationship between Huni and Sneferu. A possible wife of Huni was a queen, Jefretniti, whose name appears in black ink inscriptions on beer vases from Elephantine, her name guided by the title Great One of the Hetty Scepter. Jefretniti's death is mentioned alongside several events during the reign of Huni, although no king is mentioned in the inscription by name. Until today, no child or other relative of Huni can be identified and connected to him with certainty.
But that doesn't stop the speculation.
The only contemporary documents that show some evaluation of any political and social developments during Huni's time are the tomb inscriptions of several high-dating officials that span the end of the 3rd dynasty until the beginning of the 4th dynasty. They give explicit insights into the power structure of the state, with nomarchs and viziers exercising important powers, and for the first time in Egyptian history, these tomb inscriptions mention that titles of high-ranked officials and priests were only passed down by inheritance from father to son.
Was this the time when the priests started to wean the power away from the king?
It seems that Huni did undertake some building projects, as the Turin canon credits Huni with the erection of a certain building, for which Huni must have been honoured in later times, but, unfortunately, the papyrus is damaged at the relevant column and the name of the building is lost. The most impressive monument which can relatively clearly be attributed to Huni is the small granite step pyramid, discovered behind the modern Nubian village on the western side of the island of Elephantine in 1909, one of 7 small mud brick Old Kingdom pyramids spread throughout the Nile Valley from Aswan to Abu Rawash. Many Egyptologists believe that all but the Sailor Pyramid, located at Fayum, may be dated to the reign of Huni. Excavations showing that Huni's successor, Sneferu, was actually responsible for the step pyramid at Sailor, as 2 large stelae with the name of Sneferu were found in front of the pyramid, making it the only cultic step pyramid that can be definitively connected to an Old Kingdom ruler.
No, that is not definitive proof. It is speculative assertion. The stela may well have been added by Sneferu, but the pyramid could have been there for thousands of years.
Behind me is what looks like a pyramid with basalt or grey sandstone or grey granite. We're not allowed to go in there because they're excavating all this area at the moment. It'd be very interesting to go and see what's really at the base of all of this.
Supposedly dating to the 3rd dynasty and appearing to be aligned with the Nile, the Elephantine Pyramid remains constructed in 3 steps of rough-hewn granite blocks bound with a clay mortar and assembled on a rock foundation levelled from the plateau.
Well, firstly, it makes absolute sense that the pyramid is aligned with the river. Everything is aligned with something. But what is the preoccupation with granite all about? And was the clay mortar a later attempt to repair the structure? If so, repair it so it can do what? The fact that it is made of granite makes me question whether it was built in the 3rd dynasty at all. I think that it was built much earlier. But for what reason?
The pyramid seems to have represented the fictive presence of the king and was a symbolic means of reinforcing state control implicit in Elephantine's role in the collection and distribution of goods. Therefore, it is possible there was a statue cult associated with the pyramid.
It's also possible that none of that is in fact the case, that it's all speculation.
It is now thought that a conical object made of granite, found alongside the pyramid, bearing the inscription, said Huni, meaning diadem of Huni, and with the determinative of a palace, originally came from Elephantine and suggests that Huni built either a palace or a building associated with the royal cult on this island.
I refer again to my can of Pepsi and the Taj Mahal. Enough said. Well, no, I will say something else. This pyramid is made of red granite, which is a far cry from just using red and black granite for the floor of Den's tomb over 350 years earlier. What that significance is in both cases, who knows?
The inscription suggests there may have been other structures here pertaining to the period of the pyramid, perhaps a palace or temple.
But what period was Huni referring to? The 3rd dynasty or the period of the pyramid? They're not necessarily the same. Was this pyramid linked to the step pyramid of Netkerajet at Saqqara? And did that mean there were temples here that dated to the 3rd dynasty? If there were, could they have been here before then? Maybe before the dynastic period even began?
This small pyramid, together with others of similar size and construction at Sailor in the Fayum Oasis, Zorit el-Maitan in Middle Egypt, South Abydos, Tuk, near Naqadr, El-Kular, near Hirakan Palace, and in South Edfu, appear to be unique, containing no internal chambers, so they do not appear to have been used for burial purposes.
We're going to explore each of those later as we tour down the Nile. But the fact that there are no internal chambers here almost shoots down the theory that these were tombs. So what were they built for?
Though there is little proof, many scholars have suggested that almost all of the major pyramids in Egypt, before and after Huni, were royal tombs of some nature, and that these smaller pyramids were constructed as cult places of the king or marked royal estates.
Speculation that is all open to debate. As first, we don't know what the pyramids actually were. And second, not a single body has been found in any pyramid to confirm that it was built as a tomb.
However, these small step pyramids appear to have little to do with funerary practices. They contained no internal chambers and were not used for burial purposes.
Which supports my point.
Their locations suggest that there could have been one such pyramid for each nome, each ancient Egyptian province, at least in southern or upper Egypt.
A logical suggestion. But why a pyramid?
Some have even suggested that their construction might have been associated with the reorganization of regional government during Huni's reign. There was, for example, an administrative building attached to the pyramid at Elephantine.
That's a logical place to start. That they were associated with administrative functions.
Irregardless, their purpose remains unclear without further evidence for their use.
At last, some wise words.
Since Neferu was Huni's likely immediate successor, this might indicate that the cultic pyramids were indeed constructed at the transition between the 3rd and 4th dynasties.
And if Huni, the last king of the 3rd dynasty, was the father of Sneferu, the first king of the 4th dynasty, then surely they would stay part of the same dynasty, right? Unless lineage was not based on the father-son relationship. Thirdly, as we've already seen, the capital seemed to shift back and forth between Memphis and Upper Egypt on a regular basis, so it's not a strong basis for a theory. Alternatively, the granite cone found on Elephantine Island has nothing to do with the pyramid on the island, and all the pyramids are attributable to Sneferu, or none of them are attributable to anyone, and are not even attributable to the period in question. No one actually knows.
The Turin Canon provides a reign for Huni of 24 years ending around 2600 BC, a shorter reign unlikely given the scale of his completed building projects, but of course it is possible the scribe misunderstood the biannual cattle count and that Huni ruled for 48 years, which would allow plenty of time for all the supposed building projects. As a result, most modern Egyptologists and historians prefer to believe Manetho, who claims, in his Egyptiaker, that with the ascension of Sneferu to the throne, a different royal house gained power over Egypt and a new dynasty had begun.
Oh, and of course Manetho has the corner on truth. Not.
Huni's burial remains a mystery. It is unlikely he was buried in the Meidum Pyramid, nor at Saqqara, although Mastaba M17 at Meidum has been suggested. Although the burial chamber was plundered in antiquity, every decoration destroyed and or stolen, leaving only the large, roughly hewn sarcophagus that contained the remains of a violently tattered and unidentified mummy, it is proposed that the mastaba was either for Huni or a crown prince and heir to the throne of Sneferu.
Another mastaba, AS54, in South Abu Sir, has also been proposed. But of course it's possible that Huni may never have constructed a pyramid complex at all.
After his death, Huni's memory lived on for some time. The Palermo stone, which was made over 150 years after Huni's death, listing an estate belonging to his cult and donations made to a funerary complex temple of Huni during the reign of the 5th dynasty king, Neferu.
This is really no surprise, because the achievements of Huni's reign are impressive.
The relative peace and political reforms of the 3rd dynasty, along with the substantial construction projects and the possible restructuring of regional administration with the creation of nomes and the structure of a central and provincial governments, set the stage and clearly paved the way for the great pyramid builders of the 4th dynasty and ushered in the great culture of Egypt's Old Kingdom and the Age of the Pyramids.
Examining the time of the 3rd dynasty may have only covered a 50-year period, purporting to be that of the dawn of the Great Pyramid Age. But in fact, it has uncovered much more than that. It throws up more questions than it provides answers. Were the red granite subterranean chambers of Netjeriket's step pyramid already present before the Third Dynasty, possibly belonging to Nama, or even way before any dynasty? And was Imhotep not so much a great builder, but more of a great rebuilder and repairer, adding a series of mud brick and rubble mastabas to an already existing structure due to damage caused by some earlier catastrophe or catastrophes? And did that repair work extend to the pyramids attributed to Sekhemkhet, Kaaba, and Huni? Who knows? But it asks the question. Were the pyramids attributed to the pharaohs of the 4th and 5th dynasties of the Old Kingdom really built then? Or were they the remnants of a much earlier time and simply repaired? The evidence on Elephantine Island tells us there were several catastrophes. Those catastrophes characterized by huge surges of water, of which one occurred sometime between the 6th dynasty and the Middle Kingdom, and another just before the 18th dynasty, each of which dumped meters of mud and debris in distinct layers that defined the rebuilding of subsequent civilizations. But what caused these catastrophes? And was the sudden construction of stone circles all over Europe from stones composed of silicon-bearing stones some way related to these catastrophes? Were the circles constructed by descendants of the followers of Horus, who were migrating northwards to escape the turmoils of Egypt's political instability? What was the real function of these circles? Were they simply ceremonial, or were they solar calendars, astronomies, possibly even acoustic or astral portals? Join me in the next episode as we explore Elephantine Island a little bit more and see what other evidence we can dig up as we continue our search for the answers.